Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Sandwich Generation Survival Guide, Caring for Your Children, Your Parents, and Yourself. And today we are talking about aging with visibility, advocating for our elderly LGBTQIA+ loved ones. I am your host, Candace Dellacona, with my co-host, Jodi Argentino. Hi, Jodi.
Hi, good morning, Candace, and good morning to our guests.
Yes.
So excited for today's episode.
Yeah, so as Jodi mentioned, today we have two wonderful and very established LGBTQIA advocates in the aging space from SAGE, an amazing nonprofit organization that advocates for our aging LGBTQIA loved ones.
I'm Nick Watson. I'm the Managing Director of Social Enterprise for SAGE.
And I'm Sadiya. I'm the Director of Learning and Instructional Design.
Terrific. Well, thank you for joining us. So we brought you in here today, Sadiya and Nick, primarily to tell us a little bit about your organization and kind of talk about what's on the horizon here to advocate for our loved ones. Can you fill us in on SAGE?
Yeah, I can start there. SAGE is the country's oldest and largest organization dedicated to improving the lives and health situations and outcomes for LGBTQ older adults. And SAGE as an organization has been doing that work since 1978, which is, I always like to give people a minute there to think about what it was like to found an organization like SAGE in 1978 in New York.
Amazing.
I can't even imagine that with I mean, that's like, I can't even imagine that there were elderly LGBTQ people out in 1978. So
yeah,
that's amazing.
Oh yeah, there were a group of people that got together and decided like, oh, who's going to take care of us? That was the central question, the central conceit of the creation of this organization. Who's going to take care of us? And so they founded this organization called Seniors Acting in a Gay Environment. And that's how SAGE started. There's some great pictures up at the SAGE Center in New York that have like the founding members and this muted rainbow.
So SAGE obviously is a national organization. As an elder care attorney myself here in New York, I'm obviously very familiar with the organization because it's a tremendous resource, certainly to New Yorkers and across the country. And really the reason why, maybe to jump off and why we brought you in here is we would love to talk about the new protection, particularly here in New York State, for our aging LGBTQ population. So I know, Sadiya, you've been putting in a lot of work with this new law. Do you want to kind of fill us in on the organization, the law, and what we hope it will do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the law SB 2534, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
It was introduced to focus on training for CNAs, home health aides, folks that are actually going into people's homes and caring for them in their homes. And I think what we forget in this situation is that if we sat back and thought about the one place where we feel truly safe, where we feel truly able to be our whole selves, that's home. And we're sending individuals into people's homes, right? And I hate to put it this way, but this is what it feels like, invading safe spaces.
Yes.
And so the folks who do enter these spaces need to be trained. We need to avoid those moments where they're shocked at what they see or that they don't understand and put our older adult at ill at ease. So this law or this regulation was put into place to train care providers on how to work with the diverse populations they engage with.
Right. And so, I found a lot of statistics on the prejudice and the bigotry faced by our aging LGBTQ loved ones. There was this statistics that really stopped me in my tracks. I think that it was 25%, 1 in 4 older adults had either witnessed or sustained a disrespectful or abusive care towards an LGBTQ patient. And when you throw in diseases of the aged, like dementia, and Parkinson's and conditions like that that cause memory impairment, or a person to not really have agency over their physical being, they're incredibly vulnerable. New York State, I think, with the help of SAGE, organizations like SAGE advocating for our loved ones to take notice. Can you tell me sort of about how SAGE was involved in getting this regulation implemented and this new training that is now required here in New York State for our home care attendants?
Yeah, well, Nick worked very closely with our advocacy department, so I'm going to let him take this piece over.
SAGE today is a fully national organization. So we're still based in New York, although neither Sadiya and I work from New York. And in New York City, we have our SAGE centers. We help with residential care and support, and we work nationally on supporting the development of new LGBT-focused housing for older people. And we do advocacy at the national and the state level, heavily in New York, of course, which is our spiritual and ancestral home as SAGE, but working at the state level everywhere. And then we have SAGE Care, which both Sadiya and I work on, which SAGE Care is a training and consulting program that we offer. It's a social enterprise. So we're hired by long-term care facilities and health home organizations and hospice care facilities and other communities that deal with the aging to train the staff and the leadership there on how to be competent in serving LGBTQ older adults.
Which is so important. I mean, really, what a service that you're able to offer, and also, bringing in management, right? The people that have expectations for their healthcare workers, as Sadiya said, sending these folks into the home of an elderly adult person and wanting to maintain that safe space in one's home.
Yeah, and it's really important to us to start with the leadership. So if it's at all possible, we always do leadership and management training for the C-suite and the department heads. And then we roll out training to staff in organizations, because our belief, and I think it's sort of obvious when you say it out loud, is that if the staff doesn't feel safe being whoever they are, then they're not able to honestly make the residents or the service recipients feel safe.
Right? If your management is expecting it and your management is modeling it, right, then there's a trickle down for it. I think I was reading a mental health article that was like, if one day, if mental health professionals or caregivers take one day of LGBTQ plus cultural sensitivity training, it decreases the transphobia and homophobia that they put out there significantly. So having programs like this is phenomenal, because it's not just that one day, right? It's the total pyramid impact. So that's amazing to hear about.
It's vital. And so to that end, then, can I ask you about, what the training encompasses?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few different versions of the training. They all satisfy the bill. The only difference is that they're all available in different modalities. So we have an online interactive training that you can put on your learning management system. We have a video training. We have a curriculum that goes on along with the video training if you want to deliver it. But really what it focuses on is correct language, what definitions of common terms are, like lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. It talks about words to use, words not to use. And this is incredibly important when working with the LGBT older adult population, because what we're kind of exposed to most often is youth and youth culture when it comes to our LGBTQ plus community. And so when it comes to older adults, understanding that words like queer are really just not words that we can use, especially if folks are older than 72, right? That these words carry a lot of stigma and fear with them. So it's those, nuances based on generation, based on age, that are included in the training. We talk about best practices. We talk about creating a historical context. So we're asking folks to adjust the way that they go about doing their work, right? And those adjustments need justification. LGBTQ plus people are not special. They're a group of individuals that have a particular history, a particular narrative, and you're not changing the way that you work because we're treating people special. You're adjusting the way that you work because there's a group of people that isn't receiving care. Right. And so that contextualization helps justify these adjustments and changes that we're asking people to make to their daily work.
Right.
And then it ends with common assumptions. So what are some things that care providers are often seeing when going out into the field and how to address them? right? How to ask open-ended questions and how to ask inclusive questions. So when we're first having that conversation, there are some organizations that have their care providers do intake interviews before they start care. So it talks a little bit about that interview process. And then if you don't do intake interviews, if you kind of just show up with a piece of paper that has a bunch of information, how to go about asking questions and introducing yourself in an inclusive way.
So important. We've done that work with the courts, right? We've tried to make their forms inclusive. We've tried to make it so that, people say my spouse or who is your spouse rather than who is your husband or who is your wife, or assuming. But what just struck me is you're noting the word queer, because I would say, like, even if I went in, like, and I'm in this world all the time, and I were talking to people in, one of your programs, I would use the word queer all the time. And so this is one of those great examples, Candace, of where I would use the wrong language, right? Because it's the wrong language for the population that I'm talking to. And
Right.
That's not something that I'm I'm not awesome at that, because I'm just like, I'm going to use my language. But for people that don't know, right, queer was a very derogatory term I'm going to say up to maybe the 90s, where it started being reclaimed as a term for the younger generation. So those people who suffered through it being derogatory slang are now, our elderly population. So so that's really interesting, because we're talking about this. I want to ask you more about the unique issues that LGBTQ people face, because we started talking right about like how we fix them, right, and how we accommodate them and how we make it inclusive. But the underlying problem is that so many people have had to go, quote unquote, back in the closet because of the lack of resources or the fear. And Sadiya, I loved what you said about making your home, which is supposed to be your safe space, unsafe, right? So maybe one of you can talk a little bit about the unique issues that we're trying to address.
I would love to tell a little bit of a story, and then from the story, I'll extrapolate all the different things. But it talks a little bit about this. It talks about this language component. So we have trainers that go out throughout the United States, especially before COVID, and deliver our management trainings. They're 4-hour in-person trainings. I know that sounds long, but they're a lot of fun. And I was training a older South Asian lesbian couple on delivering this 4-hour training. And during the training, we were talking about language that's appropriate and language that isn't. And someone mentioned the word dyke as being an inappropriate term, right? And so they waited, one of the trainers waited until the break and came to me and said, Sadiya, people think dyke is a bad word. And
right.
she's like a 16-year-old lesbian. She's like, dyke, when did dyke become a bad word? Yeah. And I think it's so indicative of what happens to our older adults, right? So we're talking about a generation that fought for every step forward, that fought for visibility, that fought for their rights, that is so brilliant and resilient. And little by little, they're having to age into the services that they fought against. Right? They're having to lean on Medicare, Medicaid. They're having to lean on these government programs that did not recognize them and, in fact, criminalize them.
Absolutely.
Right? So, of course, there's a fear. Of course, there's this, understanding that discrimination has happened before. And if we look at our court system right now, it's happening. Right? We're seeing all of these laws go back into our legislative system. And so, of course, LGBT older adults, there's a high percentage of LGBT older adults that are afraid of accessing services or delay accessing services out of fear, which means a lot of self-medication, a lot of, waiting until it's too late, right? We also see this history of employment discrimination and economic discrimination catching up, and a lot of folks don't have retirement plans, right? They don't have the money to go into these fancy, elder care communities that have been trained. They're relying on these services.
Could you tell us a little bit about the statistics around this? Give us the concept of the environment that we're looking at.
I think that's a great question, because I think we sort of forget the reality that older LGBTQ people are living in, even compared to that as Sadiya mentioned, the youth culture and what the culture is aware of about the LGBTQ experience. A recent AARP study that I was just looking at, 34% of LGBTQ elders today fear and have good reason to fear that they're going to have to recloset themselves to go in. 40% of LGBT older adults aren't comfortable being out to their provider. A story that I heard not that long ago, but that I've been retelling a lot, is about a woman who was lesbian, had been lesbian her whole life, and her doctor was prescribing her the birth control pill, which I think is just a really salient indication of how you're not getting the kind of healthcare that you need if you're not able to be yourself when you come into healthcare settings. And it's from things like that you get 60% of LGBTQ older adults are concerned about discrimination, 40% are not out to their provider, and that's even higher among African American and Latinx populations that have even more reason to fear not being treated fairly in long-term care.
The crossover of minority communities is just kind of adds on to the challenges.
Yeah, and we really talk a lot in our training about how all of these are part of your identity. These are all identities that you bring into the room and that you bring into care, and that hopefully you are comfortable being in your home. And then when you get to a point of needing home care, you have to be in a position where you're confident inviting someone into your home. That's why, just to bring it back to the new legislation in New York, I think this is so important to say that, to give people the confidence, because what we find is because people have these negative experiences and they have these fears, they delay getting care until they need more care, right? And it has negative health outcomes for them.
Absolutely. I mean, we call that, in my industry, crisis planning, right? When you're at a point of crisis. I think what's really important that both of you just mentioned, Sadiya and Nick, in your own ways, are that we're talking about visibility. We're talking about people who already, by virtue of their age, are less appreciated and recognized in our culture. Then we're adding on top of it the fact that they are part of these quote unquote marginalized groups. And in some ways, to Jodi's point about as the group has evolved, through our culture and through time, even the terms have changed for this population. So at every turn, we have this population of people who, in some cases, don't have their families of origin helping them advocate for themselves. They are invisible by virtue of their age. They're fearful of being out. They can't even be honest with their care providers because they're worried about the ramifications of it. I don't think we can define a more vulnerable subset of the population, which is why laws like this really bring it to the forefront for people like me, as a member of the sandwich generation, in calling to mind how to advocate for our loved ones who fall within this category. So, and either Nick and Sadiya, feel free to take this question. I was an advocate for my uncle, who was part of the gay community living in the West Village, a block from Stonewall. And this is very personal for me because I hired home care attendants who came into his home, and one made a quite a bigoted statement that I was horrified by for the reasons that you bring up. But how do you impart upon the families and advocates of the LGBT person who's aging? How do they advocate specifically for their loved one in this context? Do you have any tips for our listeners?
There's a couple of things in this situation, right? So first and foremost, the organization should be training their staff. When we deliver our trainings, it comes from a perspective that each individual is a human being. So it doesn't matter if you agree or disagree. It doesn't matter where your moral standing is. That's all out the door, because it's about providing the best and most competent care to an individual, a human being, right? So in that situation, the individual should have been trained, should not have made those statements. But then at each organization, the other piece, the other kind of advocacy component is, if this statement had been made about race or about religion or about any other identity component, how would it have been handled? Right. And for some reason, when we're talking about LGBTQ plus issues, they don't get handled that way. Yeah. Right? People think that, oh, this is a moral issue and I can disagree with it. You can't. This is an individual's identity. It needs to be respected just like any other identity. Whether you agree with it or not is none of our concern.
I'm like snapping over here. I'm like, thank you so much.
And so Sadiya, to that point though, you're a family member and you're a listener and you're thinking, well, how do I handle that? I know what I did. I fired the aide, right? Aides are really hard to come by though. We're at crisis right now. And I think there was, believe it or not, opposition to this bill in New York. And the reason behind it, aside from bigotry, was, in my opinion, was the fact that there is a healthcare shortage across the board, cisgender, straight, LGBTQ, there is a healthcare crisis. So aside from firing the person, how does a loved one make sure, aside from training, that the proper parameters are in place to make sure that their loved ones don't sort of go through this, or at least are in a position to ameliorate opportunities like that? Do you have any tips for our listeners?
There's a couple of resources that I would encourage people to look at when they're looking for care for themselves or their family.
Great.
One is our website, sageusa.care, Sage Care. We have a find a provider section on there, and you can search by the specialty or kind of community that you're looking for, whether it's long-term care or hospice care or home care, and you can search geographically. So that's good.
Amazing. That is an amazing resource. And we will link to that actually.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's also the National Resource Center on LGBT Aging, which is up for renewal this year for funding, but has been a resource for, I think, about 8 or 10 years now. SAGE is involved in that. It's a federal program. That website is full of resources, including a great resource guide on how to tell if you'll be accepted in a community. SAGE runs a national LGBT Elder Hotline. I'm going to read the number, but I'll ask you to put it in the description too, which is 877-360-LGBT. An LGBT older adult or somebody in their family or interested in getting care for someone can call that number for any number of reasons. The other thing I just wanted to say about our training that relates to your question is that we were very involved as this law was working its way through the Senate, and we kept in touch, although we're not with the advocacy folks, we kept in touch with them because we have opinions about how the training should be implemented that are hard won. And so they wanted our input. And then we also understand that there is this concern about the onerousness of the requirement, because this law applies in New York to CNAs, HHAs, and PCAs,
right.
Which is something like 750,000 people altogether.
And just to interrupt, Nick, as an elder care attorney, what you just described is sort of the backbone of the home care piece for many of our loved ones, right? Home care attendants, personal care attendants, and home health aides. They are not RNs. But those are the people that we are inviting into our homes. So, and then I'll let you finish.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yes. I was going, who are all these letters? So, so thank you, Candace.
It's almost everybody that you experience on a regular basis when you're getting home care.
Right.
It may literally be everybody. It's more than the backbone. It's the backbone and the face and the hands and of a lot of people's care. I think that our training is really, and I can brag about this because Sadiya writes the training, is really designed not to be onerous and taking. It's designed to empower people. And over years, we found that most people, we end up talking more about the objections that we sometimes see. Most people are so grateful for this training because they are caregivers and they want to provide really good care. And they're unsure in this area, right? The way even we all have been at different times on this call, despite our familiarity with the topics, like, well, do older adults have a different relationship to Q or queer in the acronym and so on? So we really try and go in and say, this is empowering to you. This is how, this is why identifying your pronouns may make somebody feel more comfortable, and you want to think about doing that. This is why when you ask people about their family, you should ask, who are the important people in your life? So you want to leave it open for them to answer about chosen family and the different family structures that we see in the LGBTQ community.
I love when people mention chosen family. It's just, because one of my questions was going to be, I can't imagine, I could be wrong, but I can't imagine that most of the people in the, I'm going to say over 70 population right now, probably more of the people that are advocating for them are family members or chosen family members and not biological or legal children. It's because of the timing of marriage equality, the timing of progressions with IVF and, different adoption laws, et cetera. Am I correct in this? And how does that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So every single one of our trainings talks about chosen family, every single one, right? Because depending on which community you're talking about and which specific decade age range, it goes from, 44% to 60% of our LGBT older adults are aging in isolation. Right. So their, support networks are getting smaller and their support networks are on around the same age as this person. So as they're aging, their support networks are not able to provide care in that same way. Right. So all of these statistics come with there's so many of them. They talk about different things, but they're one kind of unique picture evolves that a majority of our LGBT older adults are not relying on biological family. So paperwork is important. Conversations are important. Understanding non-congruous families and non-congruent relationships is important. Respecting everyone involved is important. Being able to ask questions without assumptions about what the relationship might be is important.
I couldn't agree with you more, Sadiya. I think one of the things, and going back to just the general topic on aging in general, is acknowledging the dignity and sometimes the difficulty in aging and the feeling of loss of agency, whether it's because of immobility or deterioration in terms of mental capacity. But as anyone who wants to be an advocate for their loved one, knowing the things that organizations like SAGE are helping people become educated in so that they can be the best possible advocate is such really a blessing if you look at it in that context, because what you're talking about is making sure as their life maybe changes, comes to an end, that their dignity and their wishes and their families, however they define them, are respected. And the training piece, particularly when you are a healthcare proxy, let's say, for someone, I think it's so fantastic that your training and SAGE and organizations like SAGE are not only for the professional, for the actual home care attendant, it's for the family unit, the loved one, the family friend who is like family. So what an incredible resource for our listeners to know that that help and education is out there because of people like you, Nick, and you, Sadiya, creating these training modules in whatever form you need to make sure that you can advocate and love the person, because that's really what this is, right? Caring for someone is loving them as they age. So I can't say enough about your organization and the services that you're providing to our community. One question I do have, and not to get all lawyerly, is, we are fortunate in many ways to live in a state that really takes the issues of non-discriminatory care and policies quite seriously. What do you tell people nationwide when they call an organization like SAGE, when the call is coming in from Alabama and there aren't those parameters in place? What is your best advice for those family members to make sure that they are also being able to advocate for their loved ones who are more vulnerable?
Before we get into what to advocate for, Nick is going to talk about what we're doing in all of those different states.
Great.
But I do want to share that there's actually a lot of really good work happening. Kentucky has come in and is training a majority of their area agencies.
Oh, I love it.
So
Not all
agencies on aging in Kentucky are going to be SAGE Care Platinum certified by the end of the year.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, I was in Seattle and I walked past a building under construction. And it was, and I was like, what is that, to my friend? And she said, oh, it's an LGBTQ specific 55 and over senior community. And first of all, we're going to put the 55 and over qualifying as seniors aside for a moment, because I had a little bit of a heart attack on that. But it was the most amazing feeling as a queer person, a queer dyke, because someone's going to have to learn terminology for me when I get into that place. But it was the most amazing feeling. So is that so hearing that Kentucky is learning or becoming open to it, that's amazing. So yeah, tell us more about that, because I love it.
Yeah, so, I'll raise you Kentucky and then also add Louisiana. The entire state of Louisiana is coming back for their second round of training.
Wow.
Those are basically the things I was going to say, but I will just say that the reason that SAGE Care exists and the National Resource Center exists is because SAGE, though it started in New York, is very aware that there are LGBTQ people everywhere and living in rural areas. And because that is where they're from, that's their home, right? And our belief is that they should be able to live anywhere, and we're not giving up on anyone. I also would just point them back to those same resources. So we have SAGE Care credentialed organizations in 49 of the 50 states, and we'll get to 50 any day now, so close. We've trained just this calendar year, so since January, about 20,000 professionals all over the nation for certification. We've been doing about 50,000 a year.
Amazing.
Awesome.
And that 20,000 is probably low. We only update the numbers at the end of the month, so say through the end of May. And then, but the National Resource Center on LGBT Aging is definitely not New York focused. If anything, it's focused in other areas of the country. So they have connections to resources everywhere. Also, there are LGBT community centers in and near every city in most regional areas. You should just Google wherever you live an LGBT community center. Someone is out there. Look for those SAGE Care providers, and that hotline number, 877-360-LGBT, is good everywhere. It's fully national. And
That's perfect. Yeah, I mean, and Jodi, just to sort of piggyback on what you said, and Nick's bringing us back to the resources that SAGE offers in terms of over 55 communities. There is one in Brooklyn, there's one in the Bronx. They just opened an over 55 LGBTQ retirement apartment complex on Long Island. And I know that there are a number of these communities in California and North Carolina, Ohio, and Oregon. So I'm very hopeful. And that's one of the things that, I think we can also share with our listeners, that there is a lot of hope here and bright spots. Louisiana and Kentucky, my goodness.
I just wanted to point out there are tons of those all over. That a lot of them are working with us, so you'll find them on sageusa.care. But last week, a new community opened in Palm Beach, Florida, for LGBT older adults, a new residential community.
That's
so
amazing.
we hear a lot of news from Florida that doesn't sound so great for this community, but there are people everywhere doing great work, and you just need to connect with them.
And this is one of the reasons why Candace and I wanted to do some LGBTQ focused episodes, like exclusively LGBTQ focused during Pride Month, right? Is because I hate that it's just 1 month of the year, right? We should be prideful all year long, but it gives us the opportunity to celebrate some of the joy. And we do, like you said, from Florida, we've been hearing a lot of negative things. And by Sadiya's statement alone of like, I'll give you Kentucky and I'll raise you Louisiana, like it speaks to us. But I'm sitting here with like a Cheshire cat grin on my face, because I'm like, this is some of the queer joy that we in the LGBTQ community really need, right? Because everything feels so freaking daunting sometimes, because there's so much negativity out there, that these moments of queer joy is and this acknowledgement that this is actually happening, and like, those of us in the middle of this sandwich, right, have like a future that is being looked toward or looked after is I don't know, it takes like a huge weight off, and just gives a little bit of that shares a little bit of that pride.
I mean, I think that's a great way to look at it. And overall, as we would for anyone, the allyship piece is imperative, right?
Absolutely.
And so we come back to being an ally for our seniors, and particularly as they age and they need our allyship, because they can't do it all alone. And, I'll bring up the fact that SAGE is a nonprofit, and I know that they have a donate button here on their website. So if you're like me and you want to support organizations like SAGE that offer such incredible resources, just being able to search for the training programs that Sadiya's worked so hard to create, and Nick, making sure that the organization's such a resource, please support organizations like SAGE so that they can help our loved ones and make sure that they receive the dignity and the care that everyone deserves as they age. So just thank you so much to Nick and Sadiya for joining us and
Absolutely.
providing all this information. I've learned a lot. I hope our
Me
listeners
too.
have. Yeah, see that? Great.
That's awesome. So thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And thanks for the plug please go to SAGE.org and donate. Or there is an advocacy newsletter. You should get involved with that. There's something to do every week something you could write your senator about, a demonstration to show up at. These are important.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for the work that you do. Really, it's amazing work.